Hello and welcome to my November wrap-up. So these are all the books that I read in November. I have 4 books to show you and talk about, but I also have another one that I think I might finish in this video and just review it as I'm finished because I'm so close to being done with it and I just want to finish the book already. I'm gonna start with The Simple Wilds because this one is the most recent in my mind. It's the most recent one that I read out of these. The Simple Wilds is a small town romance. It was really interesting for me to read. I haven't read a book like this in a long time, and I also listened to the audiobook version, and I think the narrator did a really good job. It was just one voice, it wasn't dual, like 2 narrators. I think the narrator did a really good job of doing all the voices and not making one of them sound like really like a strange, you know. Kala lives in Toronto. When she was younger, her mom and dad like had her in Alaska where her dad's from, and he's like a pilot who owns this like plane company. It's a small town in Alaska and everything's just a lot different there than in Toronto. Her mom was not comfortable living in Alaska. She just wasn't happy there, so she moved with Kala to Toronto. The dad just like never really saw her because of that, and they never really talked. There wasn't any like bad vibes between the mom and the dad. It was just like both of them weren't trying their absolute hardest to stick together as a family because they just like felt that they didn't belong in these 2 different places. But one day when Kala's older, she gets a call from this woman who knows her dad, and she's like, hey, your dad has cancer, it'd be great if you came over to Alaska. And so she ends up going to Alaska and just learning a lot about this life, this Alaskan life, about her dad. So there was a lot of family stuff like that being worked through in it, and just a lot of her trying to understand her parents' situation and also not trying to make the same mistakes, because there is a guy there who works for her dad who is also a Alaskan like pilot, and there's a romance there, and that's basically what The Simple Wilds is about. I immediately wanted to read the second one, but I didn't end up doing it, and now that like immediate feeling of needing to read the next one, it's not like bugging me anymore. I'm like really fine with how this one was. I want to talk about the book that kind of started my audiobook. I wouldn't call it obsession, but I had never really liked or listened to audiobooks that much before. And then I don't have the physical copy, but I listened to I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy, and it was so good. She narrated it herself. That was a great experience. I recommend listening to that book because just like the way that she told it, it was meant to be told by her. Like, it's her story, so it felt like the best experience to listen to her like going through all these things that happened in the way that she wanted to say them. I thought I was the type of person who was like bored by like memoirs. I don't know how to say that word. Memoir. So I thought I was the type of person who just wasn't that interested in memoirs, but I could not stop listening to I'm Glad My Mom Died. That book was so good. I feel like listening to it a little bit faster, like 1.25 is usually always perfect for me because it makes it to where I'm not super bored. Like, I don't feel like I'm listening to like a recording in class of someone reading a book. It's just easier to digest for me. I'm usually that person who when I'm reading, I go back and I like reread things a lot because I'm like, wait, what did I just read? But for some reason, listening to audiobooks, that rarely ever happens. Like, it happens so much less. I don't mind when that happens, but it's just kind of like I would have thought it would have made it harder, like listening to it instead of seeing it and reading it, but it actually was easier listening to it for some reason. I'm Glad My Mom Died was funny. It was really honest. It wasn't sugarcoating anything. It wasn't too detailed to where you get lost in the detail, but it was like the story was well-rounded, set up. It's like a picture in my head, like I could see it. It felt like I was there when I was listening to it. Like, it felt like everything was happening as she was saying it. I felt like I was just getting a look into a perspective on life and just a life experience that I would not have known at all otherwise. I would not have like seen that look into that otherwise. So I really enjoyed it. Do look up the trigger warnings if you do get triggered by anything. If you hear this, that's my chair. I really need to like tighten the bolts or something on this. Another book that I read this month was The Bear and the Nightingale. I have been holding off reading this book for such a long time. I don't even know, like, it's been over a year, I think. What finally got me to read this was Sophie Lark, the author of a lot of books. She was like showing this and saying like my favorite, I think, adult I think this is an adult fantasy, like adult fantasy at the moment. I'm pretty sure this is adult fantasy. This book is filled with Russian folklore, and the narrator talks in like a Russian accent. And I don't know if the narrator was Russian. It starts off with like a family and someone's telling a story to like these younger kids. But the story that was being told this night in the beginning of the book, it was about a winter king who controls the winters, a king of the season, the winter. And whenever it's winter time, parents would send their kids out into the, or their daughters out into the forest. Some would come back with like treasures and cloaks and all this stuff. If they were like very enduring and resilient against the cold, the winter king would like give them all this stuff. If they, I don't know, complained, they would die from the cold. The girl who's being told these stories at the beginning of the book, she's having her last child, and she's gonna die giving birth to this child. But she's like, I still need to give birth to this child because this is the child that's going to be like my mom, like, and her mom apparently was like very magical. So that kid was born, and that was Vasya. The winter king or whatever is real. He basically controls winter and death and some other things. And then his brother, the bear, is like the storm. He had been like bound up and was like sleeping for a long time. But then he was woken up because this religious like priest, the priest is religious, came to the town. The priest came and he was like, stop feeding or giving offerings to the old gods because you're going to be shunned by the god. Everyone was terrified from what this priest was saying, and they stopped feeding the gods and everything. The brother that's like the bear, the storm, started waking up. The story just kind of goes from there, and Vasya is needed. She's like plays a really important part in this story, and she ends up running into the ice demon and his brother on multiple occasions, and it was like a really interesting book. I really loved it, and I think I definitely am going to read the next two. The book that I actually started off November with, The Wall of Winnipeg and Me. This is a Mariana Zapata book, which those are known for being really long, and it's a romance book. It's sports romance. She also writes a lot of sports romances, I've noticed. They're also known for being a very slow burn, which I could tell you this is so slow burn, because I remember I got literally so far in it, like maybe, I don't know, right here. They still couldn't really tolerate each other. Definitely it will test you. That being said, I absolutely loved it. When I was done with it, I was like, wow, I want to read another one right now. Really enjoyed it. I was like, oh my god, maybe I do want to be with someone who plays sports. But then I remember that I actually do hate watching sports. I really hate it, like, so much. If someone was to personalize a way to torture me, they would just sit me in front of like a baseball game or something, and I would just have to watch it. But yeah, I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was a great book. The only other Mariana Zapata book I've ever read has been From Lukov with Love, and I will say I liked From Lukov with Love like so much better. But it's like, you know, everyone likes something different, and I know a lot of people love this book. I'm one of those people who really enjoyed this book. I wouldn't say I was obsessed with it though. The way that I was obsessed with From Lukov with Love, that one is just on a different level for me than this one. That one was amazing. Like, I was in shock after I read it how good it was. This one I was just like, wow, that was really good. But it wasn't like the same type of wow, that was really good. Like, one was, you know what I mean? I feel like it had less obvious crumbs. What I mean by crumbs is like little bits, little appetizers before the meal, little moments where you're like, oh, that was really cute, they're gonna end up together, you know, like those little things. That happened a lot less in this book, and I was craving some crumbs. I was like, I need something, because there's a whole lot of just glaring going on, and it was like too much glaring, not enough communication for me. But then they got the hang of it, and it was fun, and it was a great read. I'm gonna tell you my thoughts on What a Match so far, and then I'm gonna try to finish it and end this video later when I have finished the book. This is a brother's best friend romance. I kind of like to start off these books saying the trope, because immediately people know if they usually like a trope or don't usually like a trope. But I don't think that really plays that big of a role in this book. Like, that's not a big plot point. It's just like, you know, the situation in which they meet each other is because of that connection. Gwen is introduced as a character who's like very put together. She's trying to find her person, so she's going onto this like matchmaking program, and it's like really intricate, and she is going on a date like every day a week. Like, she is taking full advantage of that program. Tony, her brother's friend and work partner, something happens in his apartment to where like he needs a place to stay. He ended up staying with Gwen. There's a lot of tension, at least on Tony's side. It's dual POV, I'm pretty sure, because I'm remembering like that he was talking about his thoughts and like what he thought about her in his head. She didn't really like think that of him. She didn't really see him in that way. But then, you know, one thing after another, they end up getting closer, and then a romance strikes up. And I feel like, so it took me a little bit to get into it, but I'm not sure if that's because I was kind of in a reading slump-ish when I started this. But then once I got into it, I was reading it really fast and I was really liking it. And then I got to this part and I started to get kind of bored because it feels like they're already together at this point. There's no really reason for them not to be. Maybe just, it's like how I felt at the end of the kiss quotient. It feels like there's not that huge tension anymore. I don't know if it's gonna change as I continue to read it. Everything just depends on this ending, because if there can be like tension and a redemption in this ending, then I could really love this book. But if this lull like lasts throughout the end of it, I feel like I'm gonna be really underwhelmed. So it just depends. I don't know which it's gonna be, but we'll see. It's a couple days later and I have the What a Match book with me and I finished it. I actually did finish this today and it's December 2nd, so technically I just read most of it in November, but I'm still counting it. I was only reading it today for like 20 minutes and then I was done with it, so basically a November read. I feel like the struggle was just a bit drawn out. She just had like complete tunnel vision on this matchmaking process, but for like the second half of the ending that I read, like the end, I loved it and I was really invested. It like picked back up and I kind of just zoomed through that because it was really good. So this is definitely not one of my favorite reads of November, but it doesn't mean I don't think anyone should try it out and see if they like it, because it was a nice, like, very feel-good vibe, and it really did feel like a rom-com. So that is all for what I read in November. I also found out that this is part of a series, so there's a book before it. It's called the Love Struck series, and book 1 is Make a Scene, and then this is book 2. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more videos like this. Have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one.